Happy Monday, hockey fans. Welcome into an all-new week of Daily Faceoff Live. The show is a presentation of Bet365. Download the app. Use the promo code NATION. Whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. We are live on the DFO YouTube looking for your inbox questions. I'm Tyler Yaremchuk. He's Frank Seravalli. Frank, rolling into a fresh week of the show like we're Rory McIlroy rolling in a putt in a playoff hole. What'd you make of the Masters finish?
It was exhilarating, I'll say that. Missing the eagle putt on the back nine, then missing that, relatively makeable putt on 18 to win it all, kind of felt like, I don't know, he's wobbling downhill just trying to get to the finish line. But that shot into 18 on the playoff hole, thing of beauty.
Yeah, absolutely nails. It was quite the theater on Sunday, and it kind of kickstart an amazing portion of the sports calendar with the Stanley Cup playoffs right around the corner. And with that in mind, Frank, let's talk about the playoff race in the Western Conference. And yes, somehow we're still talking about the playoff race in the Western Conference. Kind of 4 or 5 days ago, it felt like this thing was kind of over, but the Calgary Flames win back-to-back games, and with that, the Minnesota Wild have kind of plateaued off, and the St. Louis Blues have come down from their high of the 12-game winning streak, and now all of a sudden, with just a handful of games remaining on the schedule, the Calgary Flames have a shot. Frank, are you a believer that they can get this done? They have to win out, and one of Minnesota or St. Louis have to lose their final game.
Yeah, I am. I think if one of these teams, Minnesota or St. Louis, opens the door, that the Calgary Flames will burst through. And you look at the games remaining here, they've got their work cut out for them. They've got the Golden Knights and they've got the LA Kings. But for both those teams, depending on how the next day or so goes, those games might not mean much. Doesn't mean anything for the Vegas Golden Knights, might not mean anything for the LA Kings in the finale. I don't know, like this Flames team, like we're talking about them getting to potentially 95 or 96 points and not making it. That would be relatively historic for the way that this point system has gone in the salary cap era. They keep grinding. They're no different than the Columbus Blue Jackets. Just when you think that they're out, they find a way to draw themselves back into the conversation. The Flames have done a fantastic job over the last 6 to 8 weeks of milking points. There's been very few games where they go totally without a point, and they're scrappy. They've been in the mix basically the entire season from start to finish, from their 5-0 start on. And they're a team that I think has impressed in so many ways other than goal scoring.
Yeah, they really have. And obviously, Dustin Wolf is a big part of that. The Rookie of the Year finalist in all likelihood continues to string together good games for the Flames. And, I don't love doing this from a Flames perspective, because if you sit there and go, well, look at this point they missed out on and look at this point they missed out on, you can kind of sit there and do that for every team is my point. It's a very long season. You're going to lose close games. But a week ago, Frank, they gave up 2 goals in 8 seconds late in the third period to the Anaheim Ducks, and it cost them a point as they lost in overtime instead of winning. Man, you get that extra point, and it's just one extra point, but then you'd be controlling your own destiny in a way over the St. Louis Blues. I know it's cheesy to kind of do it, but if you're a Flames fan or if you're on that Flames team, you're kicking yourself.
Yeah, I get it. But I think maybe one of the most impressive things is, in maybe true to draw the Masters comparison again, in true McIlroy-like fashion, maybe the more impressive thing has been how this team has dusted themselves off after being in some tough spots. I mean, you mentioned Dustin Wolf, not really a great month of March, and his workload has been immense. 10 games in the month of March, a solid 4-3-3 record, but an .895 save percentage, so sub 900. Look at this month of April to this point in time. 7 games, 4-1-2, .916 save percentage. So when you thought that maybe the workload was costing this guy, maybe it was too much for a guy, a rookie, to shoulder all of this to get this team into the postseason, he bounces back and has been way better in the month of April.
Yeah, he has been. So we got a question in here from Josh, who popped in and wants to know who has the tiebreaker if both the Blues and Flames win out in regulation. Well, if the Blues win in regulation, then they're good. But there is a world where if the Blues either lose in overtime or shootout or win in overtime or shootout, that if the Flames win both of their remaining games in regulation, they would have one more regulation win than the Blues, which is the number one tiebreaker. So again, it's not just a win and you're in for the St. Louis Blues. You need a regulation win if you want to guarantee a spot in the playoffs.
Yeah, and that's what makes this all the more juicy. I mean, if you would have told us before the season started that the Calgary Flames would be in this spot, the final week of the regular season, Minnesota and St. Louis only having one game left to play, the Flames have two. In some ways, they need someone to open the door and then they control their own destiny, but that they would have outlasted the Preds, the Canucks, Utah Hockey Club, all these teams that went into this season with way higher expectations than the Calgary Flames, that they'd be one of these teams still scrapping and clawing for one of those final playoff spots. We would have been very surprised.
So just quickly to move on from this, Pat, if you can flash up the list of the remaining games for Calgary. What's interesting is that tomorrow they play a Vegas team that is locked into the number one spot in the Pacific Division. And then they wrap up their season with a game against the LA Kings. And if LA beats Edmonton tonight, then there's also nothing on the line for LA in that hockey game, which brings us to another sequel. Frank, Edmonton's going back to Hollywood. They say only the best movies get made 2, 3, 4, 5 times. For the Kings, they're hoping this year it has a little bit of a different ending, though. In the last 4 seasons now, both regular season and playoffs, they've met the Oilers 33 times. Tonight will be game number 34 between them. Do you think this Kings team has as good of a shot as those other ones?
Well, I'll say yes. I think they have a better shot, and it's mostly because I think the Oilers are more vulnerable than they were at any point over these last 3 years. Now, I know in saying that, if you watch Connor McDavid's game, the last few games since returning from injury, he looks like he's in pure video game mode again. A guy that also has an incredible playoff track record as being, arguably one of the best playoff performers of all time, and certainly in that conversation of the best playoff performer of all time to not have a Stanley Cup to his credit. That said, with Matthias Ekholm being out and with the question marks in the Oilers net, I think the Oilers are more gettable than they've been. Yeah, can the LA Kings score enough to beat the Oilers or outlast them in a playoff series? A real question mark, but I think this Kings team, particularly with the play of someone like Quentin Byfield of late, and I think with their ability to defend a little bit better, certainly better than the Oilers have to this point this season, that this is going to be a real close series. I think this is going to be one of the toughest tests for the Oilers so far, and it's definitely going to be the toughest of the 4.
Yeah, and I mean, you look at their head-to-head this season, a couple of really low-scoring games down the stretch. Now, granted, Edmonton didn't have McDavid and Draisaitl for that final 3-0 loss to the Kings, so maybe tonight is a really good test as the Oilers have McDavid back, and like you said, 9 points in 3 games since returning. For me, the biggest difference here for the Kings is just that Darcy Kemper's looking like an absolute game breaker and a guy who can steal you a game. And you go back through the goalies that LA had kind of rolled out the last number of years, they were all fine. Korpisalo, Talbot, I guess David Riddick is a bit of an outlier. Jonathan Quick had a tough season in that first series 4 years ago. But I think Darcy Kemper is looking like, with that system in front of him, as you pointed out, and how strong they are defensively, man, they might just be tough to beat scoring wise. And for Edmonton, that's kind of how they've succeeded in the past, right?
Yeah, they'll blow the doors off of you. They can outskill you, outwork you. They can find a way to be absolutely lethal with the power play, as they were in that one series against LA. They've found different opportunities and chances to win. I just think this Oilers team is less locked down than any other. And yeah, they're going to get some firepower back. How does Evander Kane change this Oiler team when he gets back into the lineup? I mean, look, probably could have played some of these guys. Jake Wallman, how much of a difference maker can he be for the Oilers in the playoffs? How much slack will he have to pick up with Matthias Ekholm out? I think all really important questions.
Yeah, the health for Edmonton is a big one. Health for a lot of teams is a really big question right now, which does kind of tie in to the Winnipeg Jets. And before we talk about that team going into the playoffs, Frank, they've gone from getting the X next to their name, then the Y, then the Z, and now it's the P. The Jets clinched the President's Trophy, even though they lost yesterday to the Edmonton Oilers. And let me just ask you this right off the jump, because I know it's going to pop up in the chat. Do you believe in the President's Trophy curse?
I don't. I think it's ridiculous that people call it a curse. I understand why statistically you might say it, but there's been 38 times so far that the President's Trophy has been awarded. The Jets are the 39th team and first one in franchise history. But 38 times previously, that team has gone on to win the Stanley Cup 8 times. So you're saying a 21% chance, or if you're looking at it from a different perspective, that team has gone on to win 21% of the time. If you're looking for an omen, I'm taking 21% any chance I could get it. That's an incredible number for a 4-round slog. And now some people might look at that and say, well, okay, yeah, but that team has also lost in the first round 8 times in 38 times winning the President's Trophy. Okay, yeah, I understand what you're saying, but I'm still going to take the look of, yeah, we're the best team in the regular season. We've got some really good chances to win the Stanley Cup. There's upsets all the time. And as we'll see this week, I've got my 32 bold predictions audit. This was an incredibly tough year to try and predict the NHL. This has been the least predictable sport for a long time now. And this year's regular season is no different. You basically end up in a spot where there's like 3 to 4 teams that you are shocked didn't make the playoffs, and 3 to 4 teams that you thought really weren't in the mix to make the playoffs. Every single year it happens, and teams slide in and slide out of the group of 16.
Yeah. For the Jets, I like Jason Gregor's point today on the DFO Rundown, new episode of that, wherever you get your podcast from. And he said, during the regular season, you play just kind of random teams, right? It's a game against this team. Then the next night you're on to somewhere else. Is there something in the Jets that another team can expose over the course of a best-of-7 series? But what I'd add to that is it doesn't matter what you expose in them. If Connor Hellebuck's going to be a 925 to 935 goalie, they're going to win.
Yeah, I'd say the biggest question for exposure is Hellebuck himself. If he plays like he has, or a close, reasonable facsimile, and we saw some big game moments from him in the Four Nations Faceoff as Team USA understandably rode him throughout the tournament and was great in the championship game. He was beaten by one shot by arguably the best player in the world to win it. That's tough. But if there's a point to hit on, it's been Hellebuck's track record in the playoffs, which for the last couple of years hasn't been great, but previous to that was outstanding. Which version of Connor Hellebuck will we be getting? And then the next thing you're looking at is the bracket itself. It's going to be real interesting to see who they match up with, given what we just talked about with the Flames. There's still a bit to be decided here over the next few days.
Yeah, there absolutely is. Probably a good conversation for tomorrow as well with all the games that are going on. Let's go outside of the playoff picture, Frank. We've been kind of touching on every team as they get officially eliminated from the playoffs. And this weekend, we had 2 more teams in the East officially get the E next to their name. One of them was the Detroit Red Wings. And man, it's been 8 straight seasons now without the playoffs. And if you just go from Steve Yzerman being hired onward, it's now 5 years without making the Stanley Cup playoffs. An ugly year in Detroit in a season where you look at a team like Ottawa, who'd kind of been, we all considered them sort of neck and neck the last couple of years as these teams looking to take a big step forward. Ottawa does. Why didn't Detroit, though? What was the big problem plaguing them this year?
It's their defense. I mean, their defense is not anywhere near Stanley Cup playoff caliber, and not to rub it in, and certainly not to correct you, but this is 9 straight springs without the playoffs in Hockey Town. They lost the moniker because you can't be Hockey Town without the playoffs there. And look, this is a team that, look at their back end as it's constituted right now. And obviously there's been injuries, but Edvinsson and Seider are tremendous starting points for a playoff defense. The problem is they've got no other bona fide, seemingly NHL defensemen after that. Really, they struggle. And they've struggled from Jump Street. It's been the biggest hole in Steve Yzerman's game, has been their ability as a staff to properly evaluate NHL level defensemen on the pro side of the game. Their signings, their trades, their players that have moved on and gone elsewhere have been better elsewhere. Jake Wallman is a great example. Shane Gostisbehere is another one. Like, the guys that they've chosen to part with are guys that they should have kept, and vice versa. it's been really tough to watch. And so you have a team, they went out last summer, brought back Patrick Kane, signed Vladimir Tarasenko. Those are like missing pieces of a Stanley Cup team, not a team that's scrapping to make the playoffs. And so they kind of did things out of order. If you're going to spend cap dollars, fix your defense first, figure that part out, and then add the missing pieces in if you want to at the trade deadline. And then it's almost like we got to that trade deadline period, and I don't know that anyone had a more disappointing result. It was almost like Steve Yzerman was broadcasting to everyone else, hey, I'm not a believer in our team. I don't think we can get over the hump and get in this year. And I think your team then internalizes that. And this was a team that made a really significant and important coaching change, bringing in Todd McClellan on Boxing Day, had a tremendous record after that, and showed some signs of promise, and then kind of fell apart again when they didn't get a vote of confidence.
Yeah, so heading into this summer, $22 million in cap space, all of their draft picks. I think, again, you kind of nailed it, Frank. If they're not taking a significant portion of that money and those assets and just saying defense, 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 they're making a huge mistake. But at the same time, you rattled off some of those names. If you're a Wings fan, how much confidence do you have that Yzerman's going to make the right choice?
I think you don't have much to hang your hat on. And I think if the temperature hasn't been turned up on Steve Yzerman, that it should be, and that he's in a position where, yeah, he certainly has a much longer rope because he is Steve Yzerman and what he's meant to the franchise. But I think if you're evaluating this team and their build and where they're heading, I think it's fair to start asking some significant questions. I mean, the Ottawa Senators were a team that I think many had viewed as maybe even a bit behind the Red Wings in their push. The Sens are in the playoffs this year. The Red Wings have gone the opposite way.
Yeah, they have. Not good. And temperature getting turned up. Speaking of which, temperature is getting cranked up out in New York. Let's get to our big segment for the day. It's brought to you by Charm Diamond Centers, where you can get a custom ring built and delivered in less than 4 weeks with the Charm Masterpiece program. It all comes with their unbeatable pricing policy. For more information, go to charmdiamondcenters.com. Jonny Lazarus is one half of Morning Cup of Hockey, covers the Rangers for dailyfaceoff.com. He comes to us from the streets of New York, where spring is in the air, but the playoffs are not, Johnny. And before we talk about how this season went down for the Rangers, let me start with Calvin De Haan. He made some really interesting comments going out to the ice the other day for the Rangers, and then replied to one of your tweets with sort of a follow-up explanation. I'll spare everyone reading through it all, but what did you make of De Haan's comments?
I think it's one of those things where, he said something going onto the ice and didn't think that it would be on the record or online, a minute later. So I think that's why Calvin responded to me, just because I think he didn't want to give it 3 days of speculation or let fans run away with a narrative that, they might do online, which, let's be honest, most fan bases do that sometimes when they see a quote and there isn't clarification on it. So, Calvin's definitely active on Twitter, which is honestly kind of awesome as a fan when you see a player that is willing to go out and speak for themselves. I think he told Molly and Peter that the team had told him he can speak on Friday at exit day, or whenever exit day might be. And sorry, I'm trying to get centered in the camera here. But for him to kind of address it on his own and the way he went about it, I think everything he said was pretty spot on. I think what he said also, the organization can't be angry at him for, and I think fans can understand. So, I don't think he wanted it on social media, but the circumstances were what they were, and I think he handled it in a really good way. So, I'm happy he did that. It was a very surprising notification to get, but it made for a good story, I guess, yesterday.
Okay, so let me just try and boil this down, Johnny, because my head's kind of exploding watching all this go back and forth. So player gets acquired and is upset that he hasn't played, and then is now alleging or saying that he's been mistreated or treated poorly. Like last time I checked, the Rangers pretty much treat all their players like gold, and it's, in terms of organization to organization, they treat their players as well or better than anyone. Is he actually saying that he's been mistreated, or he's just a guy that's unhappy because he's not playing?
Well, listen, I think from what he said, he's unhappy he's not playing. And I think the treatment comes from ice time when the 3 games he played in were probably the 3 best games the Rangers had played, since the deadline. I think they had back-to-back shutouts. I think they only let him 1 goal in the 3 games he was actually in the lineup for. And when you look at it, the players that have spoken out, like Kako, VC, Jones, they have every right to be upset that they're not playing because the team isn't winning hockey games. If the team's winning, they probably keep their mouth shut. But,
Okay, but they're far
Calvin
from
De
the
Haan,
first players. They're far from the first players in the NHL to not play and be unhappy. So, like,
of course,
I guess
of course.
they're two separate things, is my point. Like, don't say mistreated and then just say because I'm not playing. Like, we all get it. If you're not playing, you're unhappy. I also get the other part of it, which is why acquire me if you're not going to play me? That's another fair question to ask. But I guess they're two separate things. Not playing
Yeah.
doesn't necessarily mean mistreated.
Well, maybe he feels like he should be playing based on what the results have been, and maybe that's the mistreatment. I think that could make sense. Like if the Rangers are in the playoffs and they're winning games, it's not looked at as mistreatment. It's the right lineup decisions, right? Like if he comes in and he plays well and helps them win hockey games, and they're not going to play him after that, that seems a little bit like mistreatment to me. I mean, listen, I'm just going to take the player side here because I've been in those situations where I've felt the same. Granted, it's not the NHL level, but when you think you can help your team win and you've shown that you can help your team win, maybe it's not the sexiest way of doing so, but the analytics actually speak for themselves. If you look at the 3 games he played, the eye test matches what the analytics say. He's a defensive defenseman. The Rangers didn't get scored on, and he has every right to feel that he could have helped this team win hockey games. So I don't blame him for feeling the way he does. And listen, I think there's also times where a guy doesn't play, and maybe a guy is even hurt, and the team kind of just forgets about him. I'm not saying this happened to Calvin, but healthy scratches don't always get treated like they're a part of the team. And it's been 18 games in a row. So he probably feels like he's not a part of it right now. And that sucks. Like I've been in that position too. And, your team could win a game, your team could lose a game. You just walk into the locker room for 2 minutes after when you're in your suit and you don't even feel like you're in the group. So it's tough. It sucks that he feels that way. And I'm sure he'll give more detail to it when exit day does happen. But for now, like all we can really confirm is that he's pissed he's not playing.
Okay, so
Let's talk a
John,
little bit.
I was going to say,
Go ahead,
we're
Frank.
all expecting that there's going to be a coaching change here after the season ends. Who would be at the top of your list to be the next coach of the New York Rangers?
Well, it's someone that hasn't won a Stanley Cup, that's for sure. Because I know the stat is only 3 coaches that have won a Stanley Cup somewhere else have won it again in like a second organization, right? That's the stat. Like only 3 head coaches of all time have won 2 cups in 2 different organizations. So just based on history, I'd want someone who hasn't won a cup elsewhere. It's actually interesting though. Like I think there's a chance, like a Michael Pekka, who's been an assistant coach, could get a look. Someone within the organization, obviously, that the players seem to really like and has done a good job in his role. That's a name that stands out. Other names, listen, I don't want to sound like basic here, but depending on what they feel the team can do next year, like Joel Quenneville's name could probably be in the mix. I don't know if that's something that's totally off the table. Maybe they go the college route, even though I don't necessarily think they should, and give a guy like David Carl an interview. Colby said in our show this morning, just based on David Carl's tone, the last time they spoke at the Frozen Four, he thinks that the NHL isn't totally off the table for him. So maybe that's the direction they go in. Those are just 3 names off the top of my head that I can think of. But again, like I don't think they go with the, older veteran experienced coach like they did with Peter Laviolette this time around. I think they hired the guy based on a resume and based on a name versus based on what might have been the best fit. Even though last year, obviously they had a great year in the organization. So it's tough to say that they made the wrong choice last year. Do you have any names that you think, Frank, that you've heard?
Yeah, I would keep Rick Tocchet toward the top of the Rangers list. I think if he becomes a free agent, if the Canucks they don't get a deal done with him, that I think the Rangers would be really interested in a guy like Rick Tocchet.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious to see if Michael Pekka does get a chance, though. I'd be very interested to see if that happens. But Rick Tocchet, obviously, he seems like a guy that everyone loves playing for the most part. So I don't know much about him, to be honest, like other than the media stuff he's done. But um, you know, we'll see. We'll see the direction the team goes into. I have to think that they're gonna try to put together a competitive roster for next year. I mean, this is a team that had Stanley Cup aspirations. They're not looking to tear anything down, so they do want to bring someone in that will help them win a Stanley Cup versus help them build over the 2-3 year window.
Well, that's where I kind of wanted to wrap up was how do you go about the balance of
Yeah.
like changing up this group and improving the roster while also not totally ripping it down to the studs? Like, I mean, there's so many Rangers fans in our chat, and it feels like every day they're going, trade Zibanejad, trade Kreider, Trocheck was a disappointment. And it's like, well, you can't just move all of those guys, can you?
I mean, listen, you can say what you want about Chris Drury, but he definitely gets stuff done when it comes to trades, right? Like, if he's shown anything that he's able to do over the past, 3, 4 seasons, it's bring in names, that's for sure, right? Like and maybe it's not the best fit at the time, but he's able to do it. Like he brought in Kane, brought in Tarasenko, got rid of Truba's contract, brings in JT Miller. Like he has the ability to do it. So I don't see why. That can't happen, and I do think they will find a way to get rid of Mika Zibanejad and Chris Kreider. It's just a matter of will someone else be willing to take them. I think that's going to be the focus of the summer is to move on from those contracts, but you got to find a suitor. So that's the hardest part of it. But I do, from what I've gathered, I have to think that they're going to do everything they can to move on from those two.
Should be an interesting summer out in New York. Jonny, appreciate your time. Thanks for hopping on.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it. Good luck with Messier.
Mark Messier on Oilers Nation every day later on today. Thanks to Jonny for teeing me up for a little self-promotion there. Let's get to our daily face-off inbox question, #AskDFO. NY Boost in the chat wanted to know a little bit about the East-West balance this year, Frank. Bet365 actually does have odds on will the Stanley Cup champion be an Eastern team or a Western team? And it's an interesting one because I think I don't even want to say there's more cup contenders in the West, but like sometimes the conference that appears stacked doesn't win because the path there's so much harder and you're so beat down. But if you had to pick East or West, which one would you pick?
It would be West. I think there's 5 to 6 very legitimate chances to win the Stanley Cup in the West. I think it's a lot smaller of a pool in the East, not to say that those teams can't go toe to toe. And you're right, the toll that it takes to get there is always interesting, but I think there's a significant balance and power difference between the West and East.
What if I told you could get plus money on the East? It's only plus 100. The West is minus 130.
No, I wouldn't. Not enough juice for me.
All right. Let's get to our daily bets brought to you by Bet365, where every nail-biting overtime win is a barn burner and every suspenseful moment in between is amazing. Whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365, an official partner of the NHL. Download the Bet365 app. Use the code NATION to get in on the game. Must be 19 or older. Please play responsibly. Here's what I got, Frank. The Habs, I think they win tonight against Montreal and officially lock up a playoff spot. And the trend as of late has been when the Habs win, the total goes under. In their last 6 victories, the total has gone under 6 total goals. And they're playing a Hawks team that doesn't have a lot to play for tonight either. So I think the Habs are going to clinch up tonight. And tomorrow, we're talking about another confirmed matchup in the East. That'll be Montreal and Washington. On that note, let's bring it to garbage time and wrap up the show.
I was going to say, just quickly, Ivan Demidov making his NHL debut tonight, of course, against the Chicago Blackhawks, and always interesting to see what their thought process is. He's going to play with Alex Newhook and Yoel Armia, so that line will be interesting too. He gets a nice little pump in the lineup. Patrick Laine knocked down to the 4th line as well.
Ivan Demidov, I'm looking at his goal scoring prop right now. He's plus 105 to get a point, plus 150 to find the back of the net, which is crazy. That's tied for the second best odds in this game.
Yeah, I was going to say there's not a ton of value there.
No, not a lot. Garbage time, Frank. Speaking of scoring goals, stick taps to Gabriel Landeskog, who in his second AHL game found the back of the net. Really cool, first off, just to see him in any one of the games, first of all. And I loved seeing his teammates up in the box. And then look at this, the way his Colorado Eagles teammates celebrate the goal as well. This was a cool moment.
Really cool. And look, first game in nearly 3 calendar years on Friday night. And the best part was really just his teammates being all there to see it. Cale Makar, the whole group shows up at an AHL venue. Nathan McKinnon wearing a credential in an arena. Come on, you don't know who the Nate Dogg is? You can't have Nathan McKinnon wearing a credential at an arena. He's there, the whole squad, just to see someone who's worked so incredibly hard to get back. And look, we were all curious to see how his knee would withstand the rigors of pro hockey. 2 games in, looks pretty good. 1 more to go, and that'll take him right to hopefully game 1 of the Stanley Cup playoffs. If he's in, he's playing, and he's playing a big role, according to Jared Bednar. So exciting times for a guy who has become a Masterton Trophy candidate this season without playing a single game in the NHL in the regular season.
Pretty remarkable. Again, the last time we saw him play in an NHL game, he was lifting the Stanley Cup over his head. Mikko Rantanen was a teammate, and now Mikko Rantanen's on the other side as Landeskog could potentially return for that Dallas-Colorado series. Good stuff. That is a wrap on this Monday edition of Daily Faceoff Live. Everybody in the YouTube, tremendous as always. We'll be back tomorrow, noon Eastern. See you then. What's up, hockey fans? If you enjoyed that video, then you're going to want to hit the subscribe button to not miss any of our content. From daily live shows with Frank Seravalli to analysis from former NHLers to exclusive interviews with some of the biggest names in the hockey world on Frankly Speaking. You're going to want to hit that subscribe button and stay up to date with everything going on in the hockey world.